Hey guys, tonight we journey deep into the desert heat where the air shimmers above stone, and the shadows stretch long and slow. You find yourself standing before the golden limestone sprawl of ancient Egypt. The Nile flows, lazily behind you, and ahead, the massive paws of the Sphinx rest quietly beneath the ever-watchful sun. Everything smells faintly of sun-baked clay, burning incense, and something slightly sour, probably goat. There's no ticking clock here. No phones, no digital calendars screaming about deadlines, just the sound of sandals on sand and a sun so bright you'd swear it's trying to erase time itself. You look around and realize no one here seems particularly rushed, and yet, somehow, things still happen on schedule. Temples open at dawn, farmers head out in rhythm with the sun, workers change shifts like clockwork. The unsettling truth: you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes here, not because of the heat, although that's no joke, but because there are no clocks, no Google reminders, and absolutely zero espresso machines. People here tell time with their eyes, and with the shadows dancing beneath their feet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, what's your current time and where in the world are you listening from? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk slowly through a dusty courtyard in Thebes, where sunlight cuts clean geometric shapes across the smooth stone. Every column casts a shadow. Every shadow, it turns out, tells a story. You're in a world that reads these shadows not just as curious tricks of light, but as literal guides to the hours. This is a civilization obsessed with patterns. The rising and setting of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, the tilt of stars in the sky. You see it in the carvings, in the temples, in the rigid order of everyday life. But most impressive of all is how they learned to take something as wild and unruly as time, and tame it using nothing more than sunlight and stone. Imagine the chaos before any sort of timekeeping. Farmers missing irrigation slots, temples opening too early. One priest shows up for a ceremony while another is still eating lentils. It was a mess, and you, perhaps newly reincarnated as an ancient scribe, get to witness the beginnings of the fix. In the earliest days, Egyptians didn't measure time the way you do now. Their days were divided loosely into day and night. That's it. The sun's appearance signaled activity. Its disappearance meant sleep, or at least dinner under flickering oil lamps. Precision wasn't the point until it was, because once temples started structuring prayers at exact intervals, and field labor required better coordination. People began noticing something interesting. Shadows weren't random. A man standing still at noon cast almost no shadow, but in the early morning or late afternoon, his silhouette could stretch halfway across the courtyard. Now imagine you're a temple assistant. Every morning, you're told to bring a tray of offerings at the 3rd hour, but no one has watches, and roosters are notoriously inconsistent. So, you start marking where your boss's shadow lands when he says, now. After a few days, a pattern emerges. It clicks. That's when you realize this shadow thing could actually work. It started informally. Lines drawn in sand, marks etched on stone, a patch of red pigment near a doorway where someone noticed, hey, when the shadow hits this, we break for lunch. Crude but effective, and honestly, probably more dependable than some modern train schedules. The first structures, intentionally designed to interact with the sun, obelisks. You see one now towering over you in a temple square. It's not just a monument to a pharaoh or a sun god. It's also a high-tech piece of solar engineering, its point catching sunlight, its base casting shade. These tall, tapered pillars, often mistaken as purely decorative, were some of the earliest tools for understanding the passage of the day. As the sun moves across the sky, the obelisk's shadow rotates, short at noon, long again at dusk. People started paying close attention to this movement. They scratched hash marks where shadows fell. Merchants learned that the 3rd notch meant time to open shop. Farmers knew the 6th meant time to head home. It wasn't exact like modern hours, but it was consistent enough to build a schedule around. Quirky tidbit: obelisks weren't just single-use structures. They also served spiritual and astrological purposes like tuning forks for the gods. But for the average Egyptian, they became glorified sun clocks. That's right, ancient Egypt's timekeeping revolution began not with gears and bells, but with really tall rocks and patient observation. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians invented this method independently, or borrowed ideas from even older Mesopotamian shadow readers. Some suggest influences drifted up the Nile from Nubia, others credit Babylonian sky watchers. But in Egypt, the concept was refined, formalized, and eventually embedded in stone literally. As you lie back in the soft sand, a warm breeze curls past. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rings. But it's not marking time, it's calling attention to the sun's position. Funny how in a world without clocks, people still manage to be on time more often than you with an Apple Watch. The late afternoon sun casts longer shadows now. Everything slows, even your thoughts stretch like lazy cats in the heat. Time here feels tactile, measured not by ticking seconds, but by shifting shapes of light and dark. And as you drift through this desert of silent geometry, one thing becomes clear. They didn't just watch shadows, they listened to them. You're sitting on a low stone wall now, its surface warm from hours of direct sun. There's no sign of urgency in the breeze, or in the way the linen-robed villagers wander past. No one's looking at a wristwatch. No one's tapping at a phone. Yet, somehow, everyone seems to know when it's time for lunch, prayers, meetings with scribes, or a well-earned nap in the shade of a sycamore fig. That's the beauty of Egypt before clocks. Time flows not in sharp ticks, but in golden glows and shifting hues. You begin to notice how the light behaves. Morning light is creamy, soft or almost bashful. Midday comes at you like a hot slap to the face. And evening light? It wraps the landscape in copper the way melted butter clings to fresh bread. You follow a group of men carrying baskets into a temple courtyard. They stop at a familiar obelisk, where a long diagonal shadow now points directly at a carved notch on the ground. One of them nods and mutters, "Third hour." The others nod, too, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. In early Egyptian society, time wasn't standard, it was observed. Cities had different timings than farms. Upper Egypt ran its day slightly differently from Lower Egypt, but each relied on environmental cues. How long the birds had been singing, the angle of the sun against a certain wall, the timing of a cow's yawn. You chuckle at the idea, but it worked. Take the story of temple priests, for instance. They were responsible for opening temple gates, presenting offerings, and singing praises to the gods at specific hours. Trouble is, they had no hourglasses or minute hands, so they relied on shadow length, temperature changes, even the scent in the air to help pace their routines, and those routines, they were precise. You'd think it was NASA-level coordination with how seriously they took it. One missed him and you'd risk offending a deity. No pressure, right? Eventually, people began measuring shadows deliberately. You see one priest now kneeling beside a column, slowly driving a stick into the ground. He'll come back every half hour to mark where the shadow falls, using pebbles or bits of colored chalk. Over time, those markings will turn into lines carved permanently into stone Egypt's very first time maps. Quirky fact: some of these early time maps were oriented not north to south, but according to the temples. Orientation which could be totally skewed if the architect had an artistic mood swing. So one sundial might say it's noon, while another one 50 feet away claims it's already 5th hour. Confusing? Absolutely. But don't worry, everyone just went with whatever the senior priest said. He was basically the human version of Siri. Historians still argue whether this stage of timekeeping was formalized quickly or evolved slowly over centuries. Some evidence suggests coordinated temple schedules by 2100 BCE. Others argue that consistent hour divisions didn't appear until much later, possibly influenced by contact with Mesopotamia or even early Greek travelers. But one thing's clear: you're watching something remarkable unfold. A civilization learning to chisel time into space, one shadow at a time. And while it might seem impossibly slow to your modern brain, there's something deeply soothing about this pace. You start to understand why no one is stressed here. If the shadow hasn't reached the offering line yet, you have time. If it's still early in the 5th hour, why rush? Your day is governed by nature, not by alarms or blinking red deadlines. A little boy darts past you, laughing, his shadow trailing behind him like a playful ghost. You smile and realize that even children here grow up learning to interpret shadows. By the age of 7, they can often tell time better than you can with all your smart gadgets. And here's a curious tidbit. Some homes had personal sundials, portable devices carved into wood or stone with adjustable rods to cast shadows on. Tiny hour markers. Think of it as the world's first pocket watch. Except it was the size of a banana and only worked if the sun was out. Not super practical at night, unless, of course, you had stars. Which brings you to the next question. What happens after the sun sets? How do they keep time in the dark? Well, that's another journey. But for now, you remain in the warm daylight of early innovation. You look again at the obelisk. Its shadow now lands between two familiar lines. Another priest walks by and mutters, 6th hour already, and disappears into the temple. The scent of cooked barley wafts through the air. It might be lunchtime or possibly late brunch. Hard to say. But you're not in a rush, because here in ancient Egypt, there's no such thing as late. Only light, only shade, only the steady, beautiful arc of the sun, and the quiet intelligence of those who learned to follow its script, and you, sitting with the dust in your sandals, and a golden silence around you, begin to understand something. They knew all along you don't have to dominate time. You can simply notice it. You're lingering now in a quiet courtyard, where a few scribes have gathered under a woven reed awning to escape the blaze of the midday sun. A low murmur passes between them, mixed with the rustle of papyrus scrolls. One of them a weary, sharp-eyed man with ink-stained fingers glances at the shadow crawling toward his sandal. Without missing a beat, he mutters 8th hour. It's strangely impressive. No timepieces, no counting, just an instinct honed by years of watching how light moves across walls and toes. And it all might have started, oddly enough, with someone pacing back and forth in boredom. Imagine it, a nobleman standing near a wall one lazy morning, waiting for a servant who is predictably late. He notices that each time he walks from one end of the courtyard to the other, the shadow of a nearby pillar seems to land in a slightly different spot. Curious. He drops a pebble where the shadow ends. A little later, he walks again. Another shadow shift. Another pebble. A few hours pass. The servant never arrives. But the nobleman has something new, something far more useful than whatever message he was expecting. The seed of the world's first intentional shadow clock. What follows is a bit of brilliant laziness turned genius. Instead of relying on nature's vague rhythms, Egyptians start creating fixed structures that interact with the sun in predictable ways. Obelisks were the obvious first candidates, grand, tall, already sacred. But now, they're more than just offerings to rather tools. The shadow cast by an obelisk changes position and length with such regularity that priests begin to treat it almost like a divine whisper. When the tip of the shadow reaches a certain point, open the gates. Another notch later, begin offerings. If the shadow disappears beneath the obelisk entirely, congratulations, it's noon. You've hit the sun snooze button. Of course, you're thinking, wait, that sounds almost like a sundial. And you'd be right, except this came before sundials had official names or standardized shapes. These weren't devices you bought at the market. They were observations, slowly etched into public consciousness. Quirky detail. Many obelisks had little platforms or rings embedded into the ground around them. Not decorative. Functional. They marked where the shadow would fall during certain festivals, or where to stand if you wanted the light to hit your amulet just right during a sunrise ceremony. Time wasn't just measured, it was performed. Now, imagine you're a priest in training. Your job is to track the obelisk's shadow across the day. You crouch in the dust, chalking crude lines onto the courtyard's edge. At first, it's guesswork. Then, patterns emerge. You begin to see which shadows mean what, and more importantly, how they shift with the seasons. Because here's where it gets tricky. The sun doesn't always rise and set at the same place. Its arc changes with the calendar, which means the shadows do too. Egyptians quickly noticed that what was the third hour in midsummer would be different in winter. A logistical nightmare. But instead of giving up, they adapted. They began to record these shifts, carefully tracking how shadow positions changed throughout the year. This led to the earliest seasonal time adjustments, a brilliant work around centuries before leap years and daylight savings. Historians still argue whether the earliest systematic shadow readings were strictly Egyptian inventions or inspired by other ancient cultures, Babylonians, Sumerians, maybe even early Africans from further south. But the Egyptian version, it stuck, and it scaled. Soon, these shadow-based markings evolved into more refined instruments. Not quite clocks, but closer. Plinths with calibrated notches, stone columns set at precise angles. Even open squares designed to cast a certain pattern at midday. You're surrounded by timekeeping devices disguised as architecture. And here's something even stranger. You realize that status began to tie into shadows. If your home courtyard had a well-calibrated shadow marker, it signaled intelligence, piety, and wealth. Owning a functioning shadow guide wasn't just helpful, it was cool. Like owning the latest iPhone. But heavier and with more sand in your sandals, even funerary practices got in on the act. Some tombs were built with openings that allowed specific light patterns to fall on statues, or carvings at certain times of year marking solstices, festivals, or symbolic hours of resurrection. The afterlife, too, followed a schedule, and you're now seeing the world in a new way. Every post, every corner, every pillar could be whispering time. You glance at your own shadow on the flagstone path, long and angled. Late afternoon, probably. Someone behind you yawns. They know it too. The sun, ever loyal in its slow descent, continues carving time across the ancient city. And you, once a stranger to shadow logic, begin to move with it, stepping in sync with the light, tracking your path not by numbers but by silent geometry. It's simple, it's elegant, and it works. You wander now through a larger ceremonial plaza. The heat rises in gentle ripples off the stone, and you find yourself drawn to the base of yet another towering obelisk. It looms above you, sleek, symmetrical, carved with hymns and praises to gods whose names taste like honey and thunder when whispered aloud. This one feels different, though. It's not just there for glory. You can sense it's doing a job marking time in the most elegant way possible. Because yes, this is an obelisk with a purpose. It's angled ever so slightly enough to make its shadow glide with sharp precision. Across the courtyard stones, around its base, 12 polished limestone markers have been arranged in a wide arc. You see sandals step across them as workers hustle between errands, some of them barely noticing the lines beneath their feet. But you know what those markers mean now. They represent the Egyptian hours of daylight, though keep in mind, these hours weren't fixed like your modern ones. The ancient Egyptians divided the day into 12 parts, no matter the season. So in summer, each hour was longer, in winter, shorter. It sounds absurd until you realize it actually makes perfect sense. Why force symmetry when the sun is already giving you a rhythm? The obelisk's shadow dances across those markers slowly, and you feel time in your bones, not in anxious ticks, but in shifting light and heat, in the curve of the day as it arcs overhead. It's like being inside a giant celestial clock, one powered not by gears or springs, but by the cosmos itself. And this, you realize, is no accident. Egyptians began to place obelisks with carolining them with temples, sightlines, even seasonal solar pots. The famous Karnak temple, its axis match up with the rising sun during specific festivals. That wasn't for dramatic effect, though it certainly delivered on drama. It was a carefully calculated decision, tying space and time together in sacred harmony. One priest you pass, an older man with a scroll under one arm and a bowl of honeyed figs in the other, pauses near the shadow line. He squints, hums softly to himself and nods, then continues on, apparently now certain it's time for his midday ritual, or maybe just a snack. Either way, the sun said go, and that was good enough. There's a beautiful irony here. Egypt, a place where life clings to the narrow ribbon of the Nile, surrounded on both sides by eternal desert, became one of the first cultures to anchor its daily life using something as fleeting as a shadow, ephemeral, delicate, but accurate if you know what to look for. Quirky tidbit: some Egyptian temples had built-in sundial courtyards, paved with colored stones that corresponded to different sun positions. These were used during festivals, not just to honor the gods, but also to keep things running on time, because, apparently, even rituals honoring eternal deities had start times. Historians still argue whether these elaborate sundial courtyards were ceremonial or genuinely functional. Did the priests really use them to tell time, or were they symbolic, representing the passage of solar bark across the heavens? You'll get different answers depending on which Egyptologist you ask and possibly what mood they're in. But standing there, the answer feels obvious. Of course they were functional. These weren't people who wasted a single grain of barley. If a shadow could be used to mark a ritual, direct a procession, or keep lunch on schedule, it was. You move toward a shaded colonnade where a group of apprentices is being taught how to track shadow movement with a cord and stick. They arrange a tall rod in the center of a ring drawn in sand. Then, hour by hour, they mark where the tip of the shadow lands. Later, they'll burn incense at each marker, scenting the timeline like a solar sundial with built-in air freshener. There's laughter. One apprentice's shadow has stepped onto the wrong marker and his friend shouts, "You're early again." Time jokes timeless, apparently. As you sit and watch, you realize you're witnessing the domestication of time. What began as vague sunrise to sunset pacing has become something sharper, more deliberate. Time, once wild and organic, is being corralled, ordered into slices, lines, moments, but it's not oppressive. There's no punishment for running late, no digital scolding from a smartwatch. Here, time isn't your enemy, it's your guide. And as the sun dips just slightly lower in the sky, its rays spill across the plaza in honeyed beams, and the obelisk's shadow glides quietly, confidently toward the next marker. You sigh, let your eyes close just for a moment, and think it's strangely comforting, letting the universe keep your schedule. You're awake again, or maybe you never truly fell asleep, and find yourself padding softly through the back halls of a temple complex. The stone under your feet is cool now, shaded from the midday blaze, and carries the lingering scent of frankincense and pressed oil. Through a narrow doorway, you step into a small, enclosed courtyard. There's nothing grand here, just a low stone bench, a basin for washing, and in the center, a familiar tall post casting a slender shadow across the paved floor. Young temple workers are seated beside it, eating what looks like figs and barley bread. Every few minutes, one of them glances at the shadow and makes a mark on a nearby wall. You're watching a quiet ritual unfold, one not meant for tourists or scribes or visiting nobles. This is the daily rhythm of temple life, paced entirely by shadows. In the temples of ancient Egypt, routines were everything. Prayers had to be sung at specific hours. Incense had to be lit when the sun reached a certain angle. Offerings needed to be placed before the god's statue precisely when the temple shadow crossed the third pillar from the left. And how did they manage this schedule? You guessed it, shadows. It's oddly beautiful. In a utilitarian way, these temple workers weren't mathematicians or astronomers. They were timekeepers by instinct, trained to feel the shift in light and temperature, to recognize the slight change in a column's shadow as the sun inched overhead. Some temples even trained specialists whose entire job was to monitor and maintain time via shadow observation. These keepers of the hour used long staffs, not unlike shepherd's crooks, to measure distance and cast reference lines on walls or floors. Think of them as ancient Egypt's version of a Swiss watchmaker, except barefoot and sunburned. You notice one such timekeeper now, a middle-aged man with an eagle tattoo faded on his shoulder, slowly sweeping his staff across the courtyard stones. He moves like he's conducting a silent symphony, following the sun's invisible melody. Halfway to the 6th hour, he mutters without looking up. His assistant nods and begins preparing the incense. Bowl. No fuss, no fanfare, just deeply coordinated routine. Quirky tidbit? Some temple walls still bear faint Mark-Steiny vertical lines etched near doorways or altars. For years, scholars dismissed them as idle graffiti or decorative tally marks. Now, many believe they were manual timekeeping records, noting how far a shadow stretched on key day solstices, equinoxes, festival preparations. Ancient sticky notes, if you will. There's a lightness to the system, too. No one here is stressed about the minutes. No one's running around, yelling that they're late for raw clock. Egyptian hours are not equal in length from day to day, and somehow that works just fine. Remember, their 12 daylight hours expanded in summer and contracted in winter. So, a midday ritual in June might give you plenty of time to sip your beer and admire a duck-shaped amulet. But in December, you'd better get that incense going, friend. Time is shorter and shadows move faster. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian fully understood this seasonal fluctuation. Some believe only temple elites grasped it, keeping the secrets of shadow time to themselves. Others suggest farmers and villagers were just as attuned out of necessity. Either way, you're witnessing a society that orchestrated life around the sky, not just in big, obvious ways, but in the tiniest rhythms of the day: when to sweep the halls, when to sing to the gods, when to sit in silence and listen to the wind whisper through papyrus reeds. Now, another ritual begins. Two young workers walk in, each carrying a small brazier. They kneel at opposite ends of the courtyard and light herbs juniper and something sweet that smells vaguely of toasted almonds. The sun's shadow lines up with the 7th marker. The smoke rises. A bird calls overhead. Time moves forward not by clocks or bells, but through movement, scent, and light. You sit down quietly at the edge of the courtyard, watching the rituals unfold. You're not an outsider anymore. You've started to understand that. Time here is felt, not counted. There's no race, no countdown, just an ongoing, unfolding presence guided by the sun's long fingers stretching across stone. And as the incense curls skyward, the obelisk's shadow nudges toward its next mark, and a temple cat curls up in a nearby doorway. You exhale slowly. You're not sure how much time has passed, but that's okay, because here in ancient Egypt, you're finally learning the greatest secret. Sometimes, not knowing the exact time is exactly what lets you enjoy the moment. You stretch a little, brushing the dust off your linen tunic or what passes for one in this dreamy little side step. Into the past and squint into the sky. The sun has begun its slow tilt westward. That golden time of day when the light starts warming up the walls like a fresh loaf of bread. You can almost hear it crackling. Somewhere behind you, a group of children laugh, playing a game that involves chasing their own shadows. One falls over dramatically, blaming Ra for moving too fast. You smile, because whether they know it or not, they're imitating the oldest rhythm in Egyptian life. You follow the soft chorus of sandals scuffing stone toward the outer precincts of a larger temple complex, this one dedicated to Ra himself, the sun god, the one who rides across the sky in his solar bark. To the ancient Egyptians, Ra wasn't just a myth. He was time incarnate. Every day, he rose in the east, journeyed across the heavens, and descended into the underworld. Nighttime was his perilous voyage through the duat filled with serpents and gods who couldn't keep their egos in check. But at dawn, like clockwork, he returned reborn. And this mythology of motion became the spiritual backbone of Egypt's timekeeping. The sun's movement wasn't just a helpful way to know. When lunch was ready, it was divine choreography. To follow it was to walk in step with the god's dot as you approached the temple gates. You hear a low chanting. A priest is reciting prayers at the 8th hour, known here not by a number, but by its position in Ra's daily voyage. Some temples even had sunpath diagrams, circular illustrations with Ra's boat carved at 12 different stages, each corresponding to a daylight hour. Quirky detail, these diagrams were often painted with bright pigments, blue for sky, gold for light, red for danger. Ancient Egyptians were color coders long before spreadsheets existed. In the sanctuary, you pass a giant wall relief where Ra is shown with a solar disk balanced atop his head, a serpent coiled protectively around it. Each beam of sunlight from the disk touches a different symbol representing music, medicine, harvest, even love. Ra doesn't just tell time. He tells everything. You step into a dim corridor where the only light comes from a square shaft above, carefully carved so that a single beam of sunlight strikes the statue of Ra at precisely midday. During the summer solstice, you gasp a little. It's one thing to hear about this alignment, another to watch it actually unfold. The beam hits just as the chanting fades, not a second too early, not a blink too late, just a soft, glowing kiss of light touching gold. And you understand why timekeeping was sacred here. It wasn't about productivity. It was about participation, living in rhythm with cosmic balance. Historians still argue whether this level of precision was the result of pure science or pure religion. Some say priests were master astronomers hiding math behind myths. Others believe the myths inspired observation. Either way, the outcome was the same: astonishingly accurate time rituals that rival your finest atomic clocks, just with more eyeliner. You step back out into the sun-drenched courtyard and notice the temple layout again. It's not random. Every door, every pillar, every archway seems built to catch light at just the right time. Morning ceremonies happen in east-facing chambers. Afternoon ones face west. Roof slits beam light onto offering tables like divine spotlight cues. Even shadows here behave with purpose. At certain hours, a priest's silhouette will land precisely between two columns or bisect the painted eye of Horus. On the floor tiles, coincidence? Absolutely not. Egyptians didn't do casual when it came to cosmic planning. And then you see a curious figure, a young acolyte crouched behind a wall, holding a polished metal disc. He's angling it carefully to reflect a sliver of sunlight across the temple threshold. His mentor nods approvingly. They're redirecting Ra's gaze, using mirrors to simulate daylight in a shaded corridor. A workaround for cloudy days, perhaps? Or a clever way to keep temple time even when the architecture didn't cooperate. Quirky little hacks like this show how adaptable Egyptian timekeeping was. Yes, they revered the sun, but they also knew how to game the system just a little. You sit for a moment beneath a pomegranate tree, its branches heavy with fruit. The shadow of the nearest column slowly lengthens, drifting toward a carved groove in the pavement. It will take another 5 minutes, give or take, to reach it, and when it does, a bell will ring, and the next prayer will begin. Not because someone checked a watch, not because a manager barked an order, but because the light moved. And isn't that something? Time here isn't just measured, it's felt, sung, reflected, carved into walls and woven into rituals. It's a partner, not a master, a sacred rhythm, not a countdown. And as the warm afternoon wind rustles your tunic, you lean back and close your eyes, thinking, maybe you've been reading time all wrong. You're starting to notice a new sound beneath the usual breeze and sandals, the dry scratch of something being drawn in the dirt. You follow it to a sun-drenched corner of a temple garden, where an old priest kneels in the sand with a small stick in hand. His movements are slow but deliberate, like he's done this every day for the past 40 years. He draws a perfect circle, then drives the stick into its center like a miniature obelisk. You watch silently, not daring to interrupt. The priest waits, minutes pass, then he leans down and scratches a short mark where the tip of the stick's shadow touches the circle's edge. You've just witnessed the early form of a proto-sundialer, timekeeping device so deceptively simple that it looks like a child's drawing. But this is no idle sketch. This is mathematics. This is sacred. These early sundials were known as shadow clocks, or gnomons, the root word, by the way, comes from Greek, not Egyptian, because as usual, the Greeks showed up later and slapped their own names on everything. But make no mistake, the Egyptians were doing this long before Greek philosophers got their first toga wrinkle. This circle in the dirt technique eventually became more refined. Instead of just marking random points, they began dividing the shadow arc into measured intervals. Over days and weeks and months, they created a consistent map of the sun's movement, one notch at a time, and yes, it took forever. No shortcuts. Quirky tidbit? Some of these time circles weren't drawn on the ground but etched into temple roofs, where only the priests could access them, a private sky map for the spiritually elite. You know, just in case was calendar wasn't already exclusive enough, eventually. Someone brilliant or very bored realized that this shadow pattern could be replicated on a horizontal slab with carved lines and fixed gnomons. These evolved into the flat sundials we think of today. Compact, accurate, sun-dependent, and surprisingly portable. One version even had a built-in plumb line to adjust it depending on your location and season. Ancient Egyptian timekeeping. Now with ergonomic upgrades, you watch the old priest rise slowly, brush the dust from his knees, and step back to study the line of marks in the sand. He doesn't smile, but he seems pleased. The pattern matches what he recorded last year, and the year before that, and the year before that. Time, like the Nile, flows predictably until it doesn't. Because here's the tricky part, the Earth's tilt messes with everything. Historians still argue how much the Egyptians understood about axial tilt. Some believe they were aware of the seasonal variation and adjusted their devices accordingly. Others think they just shrugged and blamed Ra for being moody. Either way, they noticed something. The same shadow doesn't always hit the same mark. Solstices and equinoxes throw off the whole dance. So priests started adding additional lines, secondary arcs, seasonal variations, even short carved inscriptions warning users, only valid during the month of Thoth, kind of like an ancient terms and conditions fine print. And yet, despite all the complications, these sundials worked beautifully, especially for temple life, where rituals didn't require second-by-second precision, just enough accuracy to hit the right hour. For offerings, processions, and Ra-themed musical numbers, you walk further into the garden and spot a large stone slab leaning against a wall, carved with a row of notches and hieroglyphs. It's an official temple sundial, calibrated centuries ago. The gnomon, just a triangular wedge of bronze, is long gone, but the time lines remain, worn smooth by weather and reverence. And what's more incredible, you can still tell what time it is. The shadow from a nearby reed pole falls almost perfectly along the 7th mark. You check your imaginary sundial app. Yep, pretty close dot in a world with no numbers, no ticking hands, and no beeping notifications. They figured out how to make sunlight punctual. Some temples even incorporated these sundials into public spaces. Marketplaces, school courtyards, and government offices would have simple time slabs laid into the floor accessible to everyone. So while the priests had their rooftop sun sanctuaries, the average citizen could still plan lunch, or at least know when to stop arguing with the tax collector. And you begin to see how revolutionary this really was. Time wasn't just for the elites anymore. Thanks to a stick, a circle, and a curious eye, time became visible to everyone. The shadows grow longer as the sun eases westward. You sit by the sundial, tracing the old lines with your fingers, imagining all the hands that did the same centuries before. And just as your eyelids begin to droop again, you think, sometimes, the most powerful inventions begin with nothing more than a shadow and a stick. You're lying on a soft woven mat now, nestled in the cool shade of a mud brick home on the edge of the Nile. The light outside is starting to mellow, less harsh, more golden, as if the sun itself is winding down for the evening shift. Inside, someone hums gently while grinding barley in a stone bowl. You're not in a palace or a temple anymore. You're in the world of ordinary Egyptians. And you're about to find out how they told time without all the priestly perks. Let's be honest, most people didn't have access to rooftop sundials or shadow sanctuaries. They had work to do, goats to chase, linen to be cleaned by the river, and that one uncle who always showed up right before dinner. They needed timekeeping that worked with what they had. So what did they use? Welcome to the world of shadow clocks for the people. Simple, portable, sun-driven, and surprisingly clever. The most famous of these was the L-shaped shadow clock, a curious little invention that looked like a carpenter's tool but worked like solar magic. You see one now lying on a woven reed, not beside a jug of date beer. It's made of polished wood about a foot long, with hieroglyphs neatly etched into the horizontal arm. How does it work? Easy. Sort of. You set the short vertical piece pointing north. Then watch as the sun casts a shadow across the inscribed hour lines on the horizontal bar. When the shadow tip touches a line, it's time for action, or napping, whichever's scheduled. Quirky fact, these clocks only worked in half-day increments. You had to flip them at noon, literally turn the device around and reset your shadow. It was like flipping over an ancient iPad to switch between AM and PM. You watch a teenage boy demonstrating this now for his younger sister. He waits for the shadow to hit the 5th mark, then calls out, "Time to feed the chickens." She doesn't argue. The clock has spoken. For people living outside temple walls, this kind of timekeeping was practical and flexible. You didn't need a stone plaza, just clear skies and a flat surface. Market vendors used them to know when to pack up. Bakers used them to track the hours their dough spent rising in the sun. And guess what? These tools weren't limited to men. There's evidence that Egyptian women, especially those managing household tasks or selling goods, also used shadow clocks. Time wasn't reserved for the elite or scholarly. It was a tool for everyone trying to juggle farming, children, bread making, and the occasional ibex emergency. You sip from a small ceramic cup, cool water flavored faintly with mint. Somewhere, a rooster crows off schedule as usual, but your host doesn't look up. She's watching the wall instead, where a beam of sunlight crawls across her kitchen tiles. That spot near the corner, when it glows, she knows it's almost time to start prepping the evening meal. That's another charming detail. Many homes were designed with time cues in mind. A small hole in a wall here, a polished stone near the floor there, each allowing light to strike specific places at specific times. A form of passive timekeeping built into the very structure of daily life. Historians still debate whether these features were designed intentionally or discovered by accident. Did someone notice a beam of light landing on the same pot every morning and decide, perfect breakfast light, or were they purpose-built? Passed down through generations of home builders with a knack for celestial alignment? Probably a little of both. Either way, the result was the same, a home that whispered the hours. As the sun dips lower, the shadows in the home stretch and soften. People begin to slow down. The grinding stops, the chickens settle. A neighbor waves. From across the courtyard, holding a small clay tablet with markings, maybe tracking rations, maybe noting how long the roof repair has taken. You lean your head back against the wall, watching as the familiar shadow of the house post reaches the edge of the mat. Your host glances at it, nods and starts arranging bowls. No clock has rung. No chime has sounded. And yet, everyone knows it's evening now. And there's a kind of comfort in that. A reliability that doesn't require electricity, alarms or reminders. Just the slow, steady turning of the earth and the attentive eyes of those who know how to read it. Time here isn't loud. It's not an intrusion. It's a presence. Soft. Helpful. Woven into the habits of every house, every hand, every shadow. Sliding across a dusty floor. And as the first stars begin to wink into the lavender sky above the Nile, you realize, even without watches, even without numbers, the people of ancient Egypt were never lost in time. They lived inside it. You rise from the soft mat just as the horizon begins its golden fade into twilight. The Nile reflects the light in long, liquid strokes, and somewhere nearby, a flute begins to play a slow, wandering melody. It's the sort of moment that asks nothing of you, just that you notice it and breathe a little more slowly. But here's the question on your mind now. What happens when the sun disappears? If shadows were your only timekeepers, nightfall should have thrown the entire system into chaos. But of course, the Egyptians had a plan. You stroll out toward a small riverside observatory, more like a raised platform beside a cluster of palm trees. It's not grand. No golden columns or hieroglyph-heavy walls. Just a simple, elevated space with a clear view of the sky, and on it, a priest is already at work. He's not watching shadows, he's watching stars.c. Once the sun sank behind the western mountains and Ra embarked on his nightly underworld cruise, time didn't stop, it just switched channels. The Egyptians turned their gaze upward and followed a new clock entirely. The stars that marched one by one across the darkening sky, specifically. They tracked the decans, 36 star groups that rose in regular succession. Throughout the night, each one roughly 15 degrees apart. If that sounds suspiciously like ours, you're not wrong. Each decan rose above the horizon at a particular time and stayed visible for about 40 minutes. Before the next one followed, ancient sky watchers used this sequence to divide the night into 12 parts, mirroring the 12 daylight hours. So yes, the first full 24-hour day schedule. Day and night was Egyptian. A stunning feat, considering their tools were limited to eyeballs, papyrus, and extreme patience. You lie on your back now, gazing up with them. The stars appear slowly at first, tiny sparks, barely visible, but then the decans begin to rise. With more confidence, each one part of a pattern someone once memorized by firelight. Quirky fact, decans didn't have numbers, they had names like the jackal, the crocodile, or the two boats. Makes modern calendars feel a little dull, doesn't it? You overhear a low chant, a temple apprentice reciting the decans in order. He's learning the pattern by rote, just as you once learned the alphabet or the order of the planets, though frankly, the foreleg of the ox is way more memorable than Uranus. The Egyptians carved star tables into tombs, ceilings, and coffins grids, filled with the decans and their rising times for each month. The most famous of these, the diagonal star tables, were like ancient night shift calendars, mapping who was on celestial duty at any given hour of darkness. Some tables even included tiny human figures holding up the stars, each assigned to a different hour. You can imagine a sleepy priest glancing up, whispering, "Ah, yes, star carrier number 8. I suppose it's time to refill the oil lamp." Historians still argue whether these decan systems were used universally or reserved for temples and elite astronomers. Some tombs show remarkable detail, every star precisely placed, while others are more symbolic, with decans floating loosely like a cosmic screensaver. Either way, the effect is the same. Time moves. Even in darkness, you listen as the priest mutters something and then signals with a torch. A ripple of motion follows, another priest starts lighting incense inside the temple chamber. Right on cue. He didn't hear a bell. He saw a star. Imagine that. Your work schedule determined not by your boss, but by the rising of a jackal-shaped constellation. It's beautiful, in a dreamy, universal harmony sort of way. You turn your head and see another priest using a merkhet, a simple yet powerful tool made from a plumb line and sighting rod. With it, he aligns the rising stars along a straight axis. When a particular decan crosses that line, he calls the hour. No batteries, no gears, just gravity, line of sight, and an understanding of celestial choreography. And as you lie there, the breeze cooling your face and the stars growing bolder above, you realize something else. The night is not silent. It speaks in light, in rhythm, in patterns. And the Egyptians, master listeners of the cosmos, were fluent in that language. So yes, they told time with shadows, but when the shadows disappeared, they looked up and found time written across the sky. You're still lying on your back, lulled by the low hum of the night and the faint rustle of papyrus leaves. The stars above you aren't just twinkling, they're marching, slow and steady, like silent soldiers moving through the heavens on Ra's graveyard shift. And below, in the calm hush of the temple courtyard, life moves in gentle obedience. Now imagine this. You're a night priest at one of the great temples, let's say Dendera, home of Hathor. Your job isn't just to chant and dust the statues. No. You're part of the sacred timekeeping team. And your instrument isn't a clock, it's the merkhet, that beautiful mix of plumb line, star alignment, stick, and sheer celestial patience. You rise from your sleeping mat long before sunrise, when the sky is still indigo and the air holds its last trace of coolness. With careful hands, You position your merkhet toward the northern star, usually a star in the constellation we now call Ursa Minor, though back then it had more poetic names like the Indestructible One. The plumb line hangs still in the air, forming a vertical axis against the night sky. You align it with a fixed point, maybe the corner of a temple wall, maybe a notch carved into a wooden beam, and then you wait. You're not checking hours. You're waiting for the appearance of the next Decan star. And when it rises along the line, you speak the time aloud. That's it. Time just happened. This system was so accurate. Ancient timekeepers could predict eclipses and even seasonal changes, not bad for a setup. That could be built with string, sticks, and some divine stubbornness. Quirky tidbit, some merkhet kits came in little linen-wrapped bundles, with instructions written in hieratic script, basically the ancient Egyptian version of IKEA assembly guides, only with fewer Allen wrenches and more prayers to Thoth. And speaking of Thoth, he's the deity of wisdom, writing, and time, and, naturally, he gets top billing whenever clocks are mentioned. The Egyptians believed Thoth actually invented time itself. His ibis-shaped head was said to peak above the horizon before sunrise, setting the first hour in motion. Temples often had murals of Thoth recording the passing hours with a stylus and tablet. He didn't just observe time, he documented it, held it accountable, made it sacred. Some myths even describe him using time as a kind of cosmic currency, measuring out lifespans or weighing decisions in the court of the dead. Historians still argue how much of this star-based timekeeping system trickled down into everyday life. Was the average farmer counting decans while herding goats? Probably not. But there's growing evidence that nighttime timekeeping wasn't just for priests. Some Nile-side communities passed down oral traditions linking certain star appearances with farm tasks. When the jackal rises, water the reeds. When the boat appears, bring in the goats. If you see the foreleg of the ox, go back to sleep. You've got time. You chuckle softly at that last one. Even thousands of years ago, people craved just a few more minutes of shut-eye. Some things never change. Back on the temple rooftop, the timekeeping priest lights a small oil lamp. The flame flickers but doesn't waver, proof that the wind has died down. He places the lamp beside a notch in the floor, designed to catch the first beam of starlight from a particular decan. That's right, some temples didn't just watch stars. They designed buildings to interact with them. There are temples whose entire architecture was calibrated not just for solar solstices, but for stellar alignments. When a star rose at the exact angle between two stone pillars, it meant the new month had begun, or a holy festival was due. You start to understand these weren't temples. They were giant stone calendars, built in harmony with the heavens. And you're lucky enough to be watching one work right now. The Decan known as the Red Eye appears just above the horizon. It glimmers faintly through the haze. A priest calls out. A chime rings. Somewhere below, the offering tables are refreshed with cool water, bread, and fruit. Time is moving again quietly. Faithfully, the stars don't rush. They don't apologize for being a few seconds off. They simply show up on time, every time, and in doing so, they offer something more profound than punctuality. They offer trust. You sit up slowly, blinking at the ever-brightening night. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a lullaby drifts through the dark. And the stars above those ancient timekeepers, those celestial notches on the universe's wristwatch, keep going, pulling you with them, gently, hour by hour, through the velvet curtain of night. You're walking now, not quite fully awake, not quite asleep either, along the quiet stretch of desert just outside the city. The sand is cool beneath your feet, the stars steady above your head. You pass a few small homes with sleeping goats, some oil lamps still flickering, and the low murmur of someone reciting a bedtime prayer to Isis or perhaps Hathor. But ahead, something unusual catches your eye. A small group of workers hunched over a peculiar-looking object on a wooden table. You draw closer. No obelisks here, no majestic temples, just a small copper bowl filled with water. A float made of papyrus reed and a curious funnel-shaped spout. You've stumbled upon one of Egypt's strangest and most fascinating inventions, the clepsydra, or water clock. That's right. When the sky was cloudy or the stars were hidden by desert storms, and even shadows were unreliable, Egyptians turned to a new element to mark time: flow. This device works like this. Water drips from a small hole at a constant rate into a marked container. As the water level rises, it reaches different gradations, each representing the passage of time. Think of it as the world's earliest version of a ticking clock, except instead of gears, it uses gravity and patience. And here's the quirky part: these clocks weren't passive. Someone had to watch them constantly. A designated timekeeper, usually a temple apprentice or scribe, would sit beside the clepsydra, noting when the water reached each mark, and sometimes even ringing a bell to signal the change of hour. Sounds peaceful, right? Unless you've ever tried to stay awake next to the sound of slow dripping water. You lean over and peer into the device. The water moves so slowly it seems to stand still. But if you look long enough, you'll notice a gentle shift, a shimmering ripple as it inches toward the next mark. This was precision work, especially important for rituals that had to occur at fixed intervals, like nightly prayers to Osiris or scheduled offerings to the dead. The clepsydra offered something no sundial or Decan system could provide: measured, continuous time. Even during the darkest hours, historians still argue where the water clock truly originated: Mesopotamia or Egypt. But we do know that some of the oldest known examples were found in Thebes, inscribed with royal names and temple hour notations. These weren't just buckets with holes. They were calibrated machines, some shaped like lotuses, others carved with flowing hieroglyphs praising Thoth. One remarkable example even had adjustable outflow holes, allowing for seasonal time correction. You heard that right: daylight saving time in ancient Egypt. Sort of. They realized water flowed differently depending on temperature and time of year, and they made clever modifications to keep things accurate. You sit beside the timekeeper now, a sleepy teenager blinking into the darkness, holding a small oil lamp and tapping his fingers on his knee to stay awake. Every few minutes, he mutters a count and scratches a mark onto his tablet. 8th hour. He says softly, maybe 9th. Hard to tell when you're tired. You smile, because even 3,000 years ago, nobody liked the night shift. But this job mattered. The priests inside the temple depended on him to know when to light incense, when to awaken the statues with song, when to open the doors to the sacred inner sanctum. A few minutes off, and the whole spiritual schedule unraveled. You glance at the stars again, wondering how the water clock fits into a sky-based culture. It's a fair question, after all. The decans and sun shadows were gifts from nature. This is an artificial tool, a workaround. Yet the Egyptians didn't see it that way. For them, water wasn't just a practical resource, it was divine. The Nile flowed at the command of Hapi. The underworld was a watery realm. His solar boat floated across the night sky through celestial waters. So, marking time with water, that wasn't cheating. That was holy. It allowed the priests to honor their gods with punctuality, even when the clouds rolled in or the moon sulked behind desert winds. Quirky tidbit: some wealthier households kept personal water clocks smaller, painted ones shaped like fish or lotus buds. They weren't accurate enough to run a temple, but they were perfect for knowing when to turn the bread or wake up for morning prayers. You dip your finger into the clepsydra's pool. The water is cool, soft, smooth as silk. And then you realize this moment, this drip, this ripple, it is time. Not something counted, but something experienced. Not a ticking, but a flowing. And just like that, the next hour arrives. You don't hear it. You feel it. You rise gently from beside the clepsydra, shaking the desert dust from your clothes. The stars have begun to fade now, just barely, but enough to suggest that dawn is coming. There's a whisper of lavender at the eastern edge of the sky, the kind of color that makes you blink twice, unsure whether you're seeing light or just imagining it. And suddenly, everything feels like it's holding its breath. The priests in the temple stir. Roosters make a half-hearted attempt at waking. The city. The teenager watching the water clock mumbles something about the 9th hour and rubs his eyes with the back of his hand. You find yourself walking once more. this time back toward the great ceremonial avenue leading to the Temple of Karnak. And there, just as you round a limestone column, you see it, the obelisk tall, proud, utterly unmoving, and yet perfectly in tune with motion itself. By now, you've seen shadows used in gardens, in homes, in temple courtyards, but the obelisk shadow, that's the master stroke. Imagine the Egyptian sundial system scaled up to architectural grandeur. Not just a stick and a circle, but a tower of sacred geometry designed to cast the day's grandest time-marking shadow. This one stands over 20 meters high, carved with the names of gods and kings, flanked by stone lions and faded banners. You step closer, looking at the long dark finger stretching from its base, inching slowly across the polished courtyard floor. You're standing in the middle of what scholars believe to be a giant horizontal sundial, not just a display of power or divine favor, but a precise timekeeping instrument, with our lines cut into the stone surrounding the obelisk's base. And here's the genius part. As the sun rises, the obelisk's shadow shifts across these engraved lines, each marking a seasonally adjusted Egyptian hour. The entire square is alive with quiet anticipation. An elderly priest leans on his staff, eyes trained on the shadow's progress. A scribe stands ready with papyrus and ink. Somewhere, a group of musicians hold still, waiting for the signal, because when the shadow reaches the right point, the morning ceremony begins. Boom, instant ritual cue. Quirky tidbit: some ancient texts suggest that the obelisk's shadow was also used to determine tax collection dates, which is somehow both majestic and deeply annoying. Nothing quite like a 70-ton stone monument reminding you that you owe back grain. You glance up and see the very top of the obelisk glowing gold. As the first sunlight hits its pyramidion, a tiny, gilded cap meant to catch Ra's morning kiss. Priests would sometimes polish this piece with special oils or fine sand to keep it reflective, ensuring that the god's light would shine on the temple first and the city second. Historians still argue about how these hour lines were calibrated. Some believe they were adjusted yearly using solstice measurements and star tables. Others suggest a complex interaction between solar observation and astronomical reference points, a hybrid method as practical as it was spiritual. You can feel it now, the sun climbing behind you, the heat still gentle but rising. The shadow from the obelisk slides toward the 4th-hour line. A deep horn sounds in the distance. The scribe nods. It's official. The new day has begun. You watch as the temple doors open slowly. Priests emerge in clean white linen robes, some carrying trays of lotus flowers, others lifting small statues or amulets. The music begins, a soft rhythm of sistrums and hand drums, like rainfall on copper, and all of it the pageantry, the poetry. The precision hinges on that shadow. Think about it. No wires, no gears, no power source, just a giant stone, sunlight, and a civilization willing to stand quietly and listen to what the sky had to say. Even now, thousands of years later, the obelisks still stand. Some were stolen, of course carted off to Rome, Paris, London, New York, but others remain right here in Egypt, still casting shadows, still silently measuring time. You circle around the base, tracing your fingers over the hour lines. They're faint now, worn by sand and centuries. But they're there, a record not just of time, but of human effort to understand it. And suddenly you get it. The ancient Egyptians didn't try to dominate time. They didn't invent clocks to control it or chase it down. They collaborated with it, built structures that worked with the sun, not against it, crafted rituals that adapted to seasons, accepted that some hours were longer in summer and shorter in winter. They bent their lives to the sky, not the other way around. You sit down on a stone bench at the edge of the square. The obelisk's shadow now touches the 5th line. Birds are singing. The music is still playing. And in that moment, you feel it, that rarest of sensations in modern life. You are perfectly on time. You're still seated on the stone bench, warm now from the rising sun. Your mind full of obelisks and shadows and water clocks and stars. It's a lot to take in. Time, it turns out, isn't a ticking second hand, it's a dance. But now your curiosity itches again, nudging at you with a new question. You've seen how the Egyptians told time. But how did they divide it? What did an hour mean to them? Did they have minutes, seconds, lunch breaks? Well, here's the fun part. Egyptian hours weren't fixed like ours. In fact, they were wildly inconsistent on purpose. You stand up and stretch, walking toward a shaded colonnade where an old teacher sits cross-legged, surrounded by young scribes tapping away on clay tablets. The teacher, his robe dusty, his beard surprisingly well-kept, smiles at your curious face and begins to explain. There were 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of night. Simple enough, right? But here's the catch. The length of those hours changed depending on the season. In summer, when the sun stayed out longer, daytime hours were longer. In winter, they shortened. Same with night. Winter nights had longer hours, summer nights had short ones. So while we like our 60-minute hours neat and uniform, the Egyptians had a more flexible approach. A summer hour might last 75 minutes in today's reckoning, while a winter one might clock in at 50. Quirky tidbit, they had no word for minute the way we do. The smallest unit of time in daily use was likely a moment or a breath. If you told someone you'd be there in 5 breaths, that meant very soon, or after I finished this fig. But don't mistake this fluidity for sloppiness. The Egyptians were incredibly precise within their own framework. Scribes recorded the beginning and end of each hour in temple logs, and rituals were aligned with astronomical markers or shadow lines, not arbitrary clock hands. Historians still argue about how this impacted everyday schedules. Did farmers wake up at the first hour every day? Even though it shifted from 5 a.m. in summer to nearly 7 o'clock in winter, some think they simply followed the light, adapting to nature like everything else around them. Others suggest a more rigid system in temple cities where timekeeping was critical to maintaining the cosmic order. After all, if you light incense to Ra during the wrong hour, you might throw off the universe's entire vibe. You sit again, this time near a young scribe who's copying out a text listing duties for each hour of the day. These hour lists are like chore charts for the divine. Hour 1, awaken the god, cleanse the statue. Hour 3, burn incense. Hour 5, open the temple gates. Hour 12, offer final hymns before sunset. These weren't vague suggestions, they were part of the mot, the balance that governed everything from weather to justice, to your aunt's fertility charm actually working. The scribes also had to be aware of dangerous hours. Certain nighttime intervals, especially just before dawn, were believed to be spiritually volatile, with demons and restless souls wandering the earth. You hear one of the scribes whisper about the hour of the snake, when dreams become strange, and even the cats seem to walk a little to quietly dot in tomb texts. Like those in the Valley of the Kings, these hours are mapped in vivid detail. The dead were given guidebooks for the underworld, complete with hourly instructions. Watch for the crocodile near the 3rd gate. Don't speak during the 9th hour unless addressed. Offer breath to the boatman at the 12th. You wonder briefly if your own planner could use more crocodile warnings. The teacher pauses to sip from a cup of barley drink, then points to the wall behind him. There, a diagram shows the Egyptian night divided into 12 segments, each with a god or spirit traveling alongside the dead. Each hour wasn't just a number, it was a landscape, a challenge, a chapter in a cosmic adventure. So for Egyptians, hours weren't measured in minutes, they were measured in meaning. A single hour might stretch or shrink, but what mattered was what happened in it. A chant, a ritual, a change in the light. You lean back, watching the sun creep up the wall. The 4th hour of the day is nearing its end. Somewhere in the temple, a bell rings. Not mechanical, just a large piece of bronze struck with a wooden mallet. But it signals the same thing clocks do now. Time has passed. Something new begins. And that's when it hits you. The Egyptians didn't measure time to control it. They measured it so they could move through it with purpose. Whether lighting incense, planting barley, or preparing for the underworld, each hour had its weight, its personality, its place in the story. And you're right in the middle of one. You're wandering again, this time deeper into the temple complex, where the air is thick with incense and the walls hum with quiet purpose. You pass massive columns painted with stars, and lotus flowers, every inch carved with prayers and promises. Time etched in stone now as your footsteps echo down the long sandstone hallway. A subtle shift in the architecture catches your eye. The path curves slightly not for aesthetic reasons, but to align perfectly with something far older than the temple itself, the sky. Because you see, while sundials and shadow clocks may have helped people mark the hours, the temples themselves were clocks too. The ancient Egyptians built with intention. These weren't just places of worship, they were astronomical instruments, designed to track time on a scale far beyond daily life. You find yourself in a chamber open to the sky now. Ceiling above, just a framed patch of brilliant blue. This, you realize, is a sky window, perfectly positioned so that at a specific time of year on the summer solstice, for instance, a single ray of sunlight would pierce the room and strike a sacred statue or altar. They didn't need calendars. When the building was the calendar, you walk through another corridor and arrive at a hieroglyph-covered wall that's more map than mural. A priest stands nearby, brushing away sand from a large painted figure nut, the sky goddess, arched across the stone like a living constellation. Her body, dotted with stars, represents the heavens, and along her spine are rows of small hieroglyphs names. Of decans, days, months, it's a cosmic timetable, the Egyptian equivalent of a starry bulletin board. And beneath her, the god Geb reclines on the earth, while Shu, the god of air, holds Nut above him like a vault. It's myth, yes, but it's also physics, astronomy, spirituality, and daily planning all woven into one picture. Quirky fact, some temple ceilings were painted midnight blue, with golden constellations and labeled stars. They weren't just pretty, they were functional star charts used by priests to predict lunar cycles. So, lunar events, and even agricultural seasons. You reach out and brush your hand along the cool stone, wondering how many people over the centuries have stood right here, doing the same thing. Historians still argue about just how much the average Egyptian understood the technical aspects of these celestial alignments. Did the architects design solstice corridors consciously, or were they intuitively following patterns handed down for generations? But whether by precise measurement or inherited wisdom, the results were astonishing. Take the Temple of Amun-Re at Karnak. Every year, on the summer solstice, the sun rises in perfect alignment with its main axis, flooding the sanctuary with light. A single day out of 365, and yet it hits the mark every time. And it wasn't just solar tracking. Some temples were oriented to the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star whose appearance in the dawn sky marked the beginning of the Egyptian New Year, and foretold the coming of the Nile's flood. Sirius, or Sopdet, wasn't just a celestial body, it was a herald, a divine reminder that life, fertility, and time itself were about to renew. You stand at the edge of one of these carefully aligned corridors now, watching the sun creep across the stone floor. In a few minutes, the light will touch the edge of a glyph carved so delicately it looks like it was pressed there, with a whisper, and that's when you realize something. To the ancient Egyptians, time was not just horizontal, it was vertical. It wasn't only about shadows moving across the ground, it was also about light falling downward, from the gods above, touching the earth in sacred intervals. Their temples were like grand sundials turned on their sides, catching the heavens, not just on walls and floors, but in sacred geometry doorways and pillars aligned like puzzle pieces with the stars. And the people who walked these halls, they didn't just measure time. They walked inside it. It shaped their prayers, their planting, their festivals, even their architecture. Time wasn't ticking away in the background. It was the scaffolding of reality woven into every stone. Every ritual, every sunrise filtered through a temple gate. You sit down again in a quiet alcove, beside a relief showing a pharaoh offering incense to Ra. A calendar of feast days stretches beneath his feet, rows of days, months, and signs drawn in perfect symmetry. And here's the quiet truth that settles over you like a warm linen sheet. The ancient Egyptians didn't need clocks on their wrists. They built clocks around themselves. You lean your head back against the cool stone, eyes half closed, and listen to the soft rustle of palm fronds outside the temple walls. Somewhere, Sandals scuff across a walkway. A priest hums a fragment of a hymn. The air smells faintly of crushed myrrh and old parchment. Time feels like it's breathing slow, steady, and alive. And now your mind drifts somewhere new. You've explored shadows and water, stars and architecture. But here's something that's been quietly lurking at the edges of this whole journey. Language. Because what good is time if you can't talk about it? How do you explain when something is supposed to happen, especially when your hours stretch and shrink depending on the season? You shuffle into a quiet scriptorium tucked behind the main courtyard. Low ceilings, clay pots of ink, a half-finished scroll on a reed table. A young scribe looks up, offers a polite nod, and returns to his work, marking time in language. Ancient Egyptian didn't have a word for hour in quite the way we do. The term they used most often was one pronounced loosely like unut, a word that referred both to time and a specific division of it. Kind of like how we say a moment or a turn. It wasn't just technical, it was personal. Quirky detail. The same root word shows up in terms for pulse, heartbeat and breath. For Egyptians, time wasn't abstract. It was something you could feel in your chest, in your steps, in the rhythm of a ritual drum. So when you said, "Meet me at the third WNWT," you weren't pointing to a number on a watch. You were referencing a shared rhythm tied to light, stars, and community. The scribes had other words too, het for vast, cyclical time, the eternal repetition of years. Jet for fixed, unchanging time used especially when referring to the gods or the eternal afterlife. Ner for ongoing, flowing time like a river used for mortal life and history. Historians still argue about how these terms shaped Egyptian worldview. Did they really believe the gods lived outside of time? Or did they simply recognize that there were different kinds of time? Just like there are different kinds of silence or laughter? You watch as the scribe dips his brush and carefully draws a series of glyphs, a sun disk, a pair of walking legs, and a ripple of water. These symbols don't just say afternoon. They suggest movement toward light, progress through a cycle. The return of warmth. Time, for the Egyptians, was never cold or clinical. It was poetic. Even their calendars reflected this. Take the civil calendar, for example, 12 months, 30 days each, plus 5 epigomenal days tacked on at the end, a birthday bonanza for 5 rowdy gods, Osiris, Isis, Seth, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. And yet, they also used a lunar calendar for festivals, measuring months by the moon's phases, which shifted things around just enough to keep temple life interesting. So yes, they had dates, they had schedules, but layered underneath was something deeper, a seasonal pulse, a sense that time wasn't just a straight line, but a circle. You leave the scriptorium and step into the temple gardens. The papyrus reeds sway gently in the breeze. A gardener hums while arranging lotus flowers near a shallow pool. He glances at the light, nods, and begins to gather his tools. He doesn't check a clock. He doesn't read a scroll. He just knows the hour has changed, and it makes sense. When time is part of your environment, when it's sung in your prayers, carved into your walls, and folded into your language, you don't need to measure it. So, aggressively, you move with it. You sit near the pool, watching ripples dance in the reflected light. Somewhere behind you, a bell sounds from within the sanctuary, subtle, resonant, almost mournful. The 6th hour of daylight has arrived, halfway through the sun's arc. And even though you're centuries away from your own world, you feel something familiar. The pull of time, the hush of midday, the desire to pause and breathe and think. And here, in this moment, with language and light braided together, you realize the Egyptians didn't just record time, they named it. They loved it. The sun is high now, so high, in fact, that even the shadows seem to give up and curl under walls for a break. The stone is warm beneath your palms, the sky bleached into a near white. It's the kind of moment when time itself seems to hesitate, hovering between morning's industry and the lull of the afternoon. You're deep within the temple now, in an inner courtyard where time seems thick, like honey. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening so slowly and deliberately. And it's here that you meet one of Egypt's most unexpected timekeepers, a statue. Not just any statue, This one is of Ra-Horakti, the fusion of Ra and Horus, god of the rising sun and the far-seeing falcon. But here's the twist. This statue moves. No, it doesn't walk or flap its wings. That would be alarming. But it does participate in a time-based ritual so elegant and so specific, it functions as a living clock. At precise points in the year, usually solstices or equinoxes, the temple's architects ensured that a beam of sunlight would pierce a high clerestory window, travel through a corridor, and land on the face of the statue, illuminating it for just a few brief minutes. Quirky fact, the temple of Abu Simbel way down in Nubia has one of the most dramatic versions of this. Twice a year, the rising sun pierces 60 meters of rock to light up for seated guards in the inner chamber, all for glowing golden light, well except one. Ta, the god of the underworld, always remains in shadow. Creepy, absolutely intentional, completely. It's this level of architectural finesse that makes you wonder, were the Egyptians timekeepers? Or were they time sculptors? You wander over to a sunken relief showing a man kneeling before a sundial. His hands are raised, and above him float symbols for time, balance, and speech. He's not just checking the hour, he's communing with it, because time wasn't a measurement, it was a being, or at least something close to it. This brings you to one of the most delightful oddities in Egyptian lore, the concept of time gods. Yes, they are deities who didn't just exist within time, they governed it. You already know Thoth, of course, keeper of wisdom, record keeper of the gods. He measured days, months, and years. He was often depicted holding the palm rib, a tool used to measure time intervals, especially during ceremonies. But lesser known is Seshat, the goddess of writing and record keeping. She wears a 7-petaled emblem above her head and is often shown recording the reigns of kings, literally writing history as it happens. Historians still argue whether Seshat and Thoth were meant to be siblings, partners, or dual aspects of the same cosmic principle. What's clear is that they often appear together at key moments, temple groundbreakings, kingly anniversaries, eclipse rituals. It's like having a divine time card supervisor and cosmic archivist on hand, ready to say, yes, Pharaoh, that ceremony did count toward your legacy. You chuckle, imagining ancient priests rushing to finish a ritual before the sunbeam hit the wrong god. Time wasn't just abstract, it was authoritative. You respected it, you bargained with it. Sometimes you even feared it. In funerary texts like the Amduat and the Book of Gates, each hour of the night is described as a separate landscape the soul must cross, each one filled with gates, guardians, and trials. You couldn't skip an hour. You had to move through them one by one on time. And this wasn't just myth. In Tumart, each hour was represented by a boater's boat of millions, gliding through the 12 caverns of the underworld. The deceased hoped to hitch a ride, timing their journey with divine precision, which means that, in a way, clocks weren't just tools for priests and farmers. They were maps for the dead. You pause under a fig tree near a modest shrine and let that thought settle in. A world where time isn't just about work or rest, but about safe passage through life. And beyond it, the fig tree rustles. A priestess walks past with a tray of date cakes and beer. A cat follows her, uninterested in time unless it's dinner-related. And you sit beneath the sun, the shadows soft now, and you feel it, that slow pulse of a civilization that built its life around something so ethereal, so invisible, that most people never even stop to think about it. But the Egyptians did. They carved it, chanted it, aligned their buildings to it. They respected time. And in doing so, they taught us that even the fleeting can be made eternal if you treat it with care. You rise slowly from under the fig tree, brushing dust from your robes. Not that you're in a rush. No one ever hurries here. Not in this temple of sunbeams and breath-paced rituals. The day has deepened into its second half. The sun's golden tone has taken on the faintest hint of amber. Shadows stretch longer. The breeze carries the earthy scent of crushed lotus and distant baking bread. You walk now through the residential quarter of the temple city, where time feels less ceremonial and more lived in. because while priests used sundials and obelisks and water clocks to measure divine hours, the average person, they had their own ways. You pass a row of mud brick homes, some with small sun-shading awnings, others with clay ovens glowing just enough to signal that the noon meal has come and gone. A woman scatters grain for geese. Children splash in a stone basin, laughing between gulps of cool water. And outside one doorway, propped up at just the right angle, sits a household sundial. You tilt your head at it. It's a small limestone slab with notches carved along one side, and a simple upright peg called a gnomon casting a shadow across the face. No inscriptions, no flourishes, but it's placed to catch the sun's arc exactly. This was the timepiece of merchants, bakers, and brewers. When the shadow touched the third notch, stir the beer mash. When it reached the sixth, close the stall and prepare offerings at the family altar. Quirky tidbit? Some wealthier homes even had portable sundial slabs you could carry in your satchel and reposition with a compass, like the world's first pocket watch, minus the ticking and the accidental laundry disasters. You pause beside a shopkeeper who's adjusting a canopy. 5th hour, he mutters, peeking at his own sundial. Just enough time before the sun bakes the fish. It's not elegant, it's not sacred, but it's accurate enough to bake, trade, rest, pray and nap. Historians still argue how widespread these sundials were. Were they common tools or reserved for temple cities and elite households? Some fragments found in tombs suggest they were prized items, maybe even handed down through families. But what's certain is that timekeeping had trickled down. You think about the parallels. In your world, people check their phones every few minutes. Back here, they check shadows. Both are glances at something invisible, expectation. You follow the sounds of hammering and chanting, and find yourself in a workshop. Artisans polish jewelry, carve ivory, shape copper. A foreman claps his hands twice. Everyone pauses, not out of confusion, they know. It's break time. And again, no clocks, just a feel, a rhythm, an awareness rooted in sun and muscle memory. There's a kind of wisdom in that. It's not about seconds or precision. It's about alignment with nature, with work, with one another. Even festivals, you discover, were carefully timed, based not just on dates, but on celestial signals. The Festival of Opet, timed with the flooding of the Nile and the rising of Sirius, the Wepetrenpet, or New Year's celebration, held when the star Sopdet appeared just before dawn. Heliacal rising, a signal that the life-giving inundation was near. And that's the thing, these weren't just symbolic. They were functional markers for planting, harvesting, praying, surviving. So yes, ordinary Egyptians might not have debated the finer points of Thoth's calendar, or the exact arc of an equinox shadow, but they still lived in a calendar of signs. You watch an old man pour sand over a walkway to catch the angle of a shadow. He doesn't speak. He just squints, nods, then grabs his cane and heads inside. He knows what time it is, not because someone told him, but because he looked, he waited. And the earth answered. You return to the family altar. A woman lights a small brazier. She offers dates, pours a libation, and whispers a prayer. It's not the 7th hour or 2:30 p.m. It's just the right time. And in that moment, you realize the Egyptians didn't divide time to master it. They didn't break the day into mechanical pieces. They let time breathe. They listened. And in doing so, they made something we've nearly forgotten how to craft, a life lived in sync. The day is easing into its golden phase now, that unmistakable stretch of light where everything, walls, trees, people, seems outlined in honey. The heat has softened, the shadows have lengthened, and the city exhales as if it knows it's entering the final chapter of daylight. You stroll toward the river bank. The Nile glows like melted bronze, and feluccas glide silently over its surface, their sails catching the breeze like the wings of resting birds. Out here, away from the measured rituals of temples and the sundials of courtyards, time feels more eternal, less marked. But don't be fooled, this, too, is a clock, just a slower one. A river clock. The Egyptians didn't just divide time by hours and stars. They also lived by a cycle so large, it took an entire year to complete the inundation cycle. You kneel by the river's edge, running your hand through the warm, silty water. It smells of soil and green things and faraway mountains. And here's the magic. Every year, right around mid-July in modern reckoning, this water rises. Like clockwork, the Nile floods its banks, depositing nutrient-rich silt across the fields. Crops grow, cities are fed, and civilization continues. The Egyptians didn't see this as just a lucky coincidence. It was the act of a god, Happy the Nile. Deity was depicted as a full-bellied man with water lilies and papyrus sprouting from his head, sometimes with male and female features combined as symbol of fertility and duality. He didn't just bring water, he brought time, order, and renewal. So when the Nile rose, time shifted. The old agricultural calendar split the year into 3 distinct seasons. Akhet, the season of flooding. Purit, the season of emergence and planting. Shomu, the season of harvest. Each of these lasted for months, and each came with its own tempo. Tasks and rituals. Quirky tidbit. The first day of Akhet, the beginning of the flood season, was also the first day of the Egyptian civil year. But since their 365-day calendar didn't account for leap years, that New Year's Day slowly drifted across the seasons over time. Still, people held on to the idea that time begins with water. Historians still debate how precisely the Egyptians could predict the flood. Some say they relied on the heliacal rising of Sirius. Others argue it was seasonal memory and temple record keeping. Either way, it worked for millennia. You walk beside a farmer now, who's tossing handfuls of barley seed into a shallow, muddy field. His eyes scan the river. A little late this year, he mutters, but the signs are good. He doesn't own a clock, but he watches the river, the clouds, the way frogs start singing in the reeds. Nature tells him the time. Nearby, a group of children float reed boats in the shallows. One girl adjusts the sail on hers and announces, Shamu is coming. My papa says the harvest moon is almost here. She's not wrong. The moon calendar, always whispering behind the louder sun-based systems, was crucial for tracking lunar festivals, fertility rites, and the rhythms of the feminine. You glance up. The moon's faint shape is already visible in the sky, a pale smudge above the palms. The Egyptians paid attention to that too. Not just the full and new moons, but the waxing crescents, the shadowed slivers, the rhythms that govern childbirth and prayer and market days. You sit near a date palm and take in the scene the slow-moving river, the hush of the reeds, the layered systems, sun, moon, flood. Ritual, all measuring the same thing, time lived, time shared. You realize something here. We think of time as one thing, measurable, linear, absolute. But the Egyptians didn't. For them, time was multiple, braided, flowing through daily hours, seasonal tides, and eternal cycles all at once. Like the Nile itself, quiet, winding, sacred, moving steadily forward even as it circles back again each year. And as the light dips lower and the air cools, a small group gathers along the bank, their backs straight, their faces turned west. They are saying goodbye to the sun. Not because they're sad, not because it's over, but because, for them, sunset is not an ending. It's just another hour in another kind of time. The sun slips lower, its arc melting into the edge of the world. The sky becomes a gradient flame at the horizon, violet above, deepening into navy as the first stars cautiously appear. You're still by the riverbank, now sitting cross-legged among stalks of wild papyrus. There's something hushed about this hour. Not silence exactly. Frogs croak, the wind stirs. Distant drums begin to murmur, but a shared pause, as if the whole city is waiting for what comes after sunset. Because now you're entering the realm of the 12 hours of the night. This is where things get mysterious, symbolic, and let's be honest, a little weird. If daytime in Egypt was ruled by sunlight and ceremony, the night belonged to gods, demons, dreams, and the dead. You follow a group of robed priests as they leave the temple and make their way to a small chapel near the edge of the necropolis. It's simple in design but richly painted inside. You enter behind them, And there on the walls is an astonishing sight the Hamduat, the book of what is in the underworld. It's like a comic strip of the night journey, carved in ochre, lapis, and gold. Here's Ra, the sun god in his solar boat, sailing beneath the earth. And here's each hour of the night, personified as a landscape filled with symbolic dangers and helpful deities. Hour 1, the entrance to the underworld, a transition, zone of silence and shadow. Hour 4, the land of Sokra, a realm so dark that even Ra's light dims. Hour 7, the hour of judgment and rebirth, if Ra makes it here. The rest of the journey is possible. Hour 12, a triumphant emergence. Ra is reborn as Khepri, the scarab god, and rises into the eastern sky. You stare, mesmerized. Each hour is more than a time marker, it's a spiritual phase docked to the Egyptians. Time at night wasn't just counted, it was navigated. Quirky tidbit, in some elite tombs, like that of Pharaoh Seti I, the entire underworld journey is painted. On the ceiling, the dead were expected to read the stars and use the hour-by-hour guide to avoid perils like giant snakes, boiling lakes, and insulted crocodile gods. But this wasn't just for the dead. Priests reenacted these night journeys in sacred vigils, especially during funerary rites or eclipses. They chant hymns corresponding to each hour, light torches move through specific chambers, and sometimes even symbolically steer Ra's boat using oars carved with hieroglyphs. Historians still argue whether these were literal beliefs or powerful metaphors. Was the night journey a cosmic ritual, or simply a dramatic way to express hope that even in darkness there is return? You step back outside and find the stars have fully arrived. And oh, the stars. Egyptians knew them well. They didn't just admire constellations. They used them to tell time. They developed a group of stars called decans, 36 star clusters that rose consecutively just before dawn, 1 per 10-day period and 1 per hour during the night. This was their star clock. You lie down on a smooth stone slab and stare upward. There goes Sirius, the bright one. There's Orion, the soul of Osiris, and somewhere behind them, the hidden decans, each whispering. Another hour has passed. A priest nearby lifts a narrow palm rib marked with notches. He holds it up against the stars, squinting carefully. It's a merkhet, a tool used with a plumb line to measure star positions and track the movement of time. Through the night sky dot with just this tool and a steady eye, he can divide the night into hours just as you did with shadows at dawn. You smile. The symmetry is almost poetic. Daylight time is tracked by shadows and sunbeams. Nighttime? By stars and stories. Time never sleeps here, even as the city rests. Even as the torches burn low and the crocodiles drowse along the Nile banks, time continues. Its quiet procession hour by hour, step by step, through shadow and starlight. And when Ra finishes his journey beneath the earth, when the 12th hour of the night arrives, he will rise again, not just because the sun always rises, but because the Egyptians ensured it would. You stay lying on the stone slab, your hands folded across your chest like a reclining scribe. The stars pulse above you, steady, quiet, eternal. They don't twinkle here. The air is too dry. They simply burn with the kind of confidence that comes from being used as a nightly clock for thousands of years. But you're not sleeping, not yet. You're still caught in this hour, the 10th or maybe the 11th of the night, where everything feels softer. The wind has gennelled, the jackals have gone quiet, and the torches near the necropolis gate flicker low, like the city's heartbeat has slowed to a lull. And in this hush, one question creeps into your mind like a shadow from the doorway. What did time feel like to someone dying in ancient Egypt? You sit up slowly and walk toward the tombs. Not the grand pyramids, they're off on the horizon, but a necropolis of nobles and artisans. Their mastobas neat and earth-colored, carved with prayers and portraits. Death for the Egyptians wasn't an end. It was a transition into a different kind of time. Remember those time words from earlier? Jet and Nea. Well, in the tomb, they take on real weight. Nea is the time of the living, cyclical, seasonal, active. You wake, you eat, you plant, you worship, you sleep, over and over. Jet is the time of the dead, still, eternal, unchanging. It's the time of memory, of names carved in stone, of offerings repeated endlessly. Quirky detail. Egyptian tombs often included false doors, stone slabs carved to resemble real entryways. Through them, the spirit of the deceased was believed to enter the world of the living and receive food, incense, and words. Those doors weren't metaphors, they were scheduling devices. You offered food at the appropriate ritual hour, believing the soul would return on cue to receive it. Tomb inscriptions even specified morning bread, midday beer, evening incense time didn't stop for the dead. It just shifted. And for the elite, it shifted into a personalized eternity. You might commission a tomb calendar, a list of feast days, lunar observations, and rituals to be performed in perpetuity. Priests or family members were paid in advance to carry these out. Historians still debate how many of these rituals were truly sustained across generations, but some records suggest that hundreds of years later, certain tombs still received offerings. Imagine that, your birthday celebrated 5 centuries after your death, because your family's trust fund was well organized. Even more intriguing, some tombs had books of hours, painted inside guides to help the soul navigate the 12 hours of night. Like a GPS for the afterlife, the tomb of Nefertari, Queen of Ramses II, is perhaps the most famous. Its walls are covered with scenes from the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, and more. Each hour is depicted in vivid detail. The soul moves through serpents, guardians, and rivers of fire, and is reborn with the morning sun. It's a story, yes, but also a schedule. The Egyptians didn't just believe in an afterlife. They structured it, planned it, timed it. They understood that in a world where the sun dies and is reborn every day, the soul could do the same, but only if it kept good time. You rest a hand on the wall of a modest tomb. The carving is simple. A man seated before a table piled with bread, beer, onions, and goose. Beneath it are hieroglyphs listing his name, titles, and the prayer, "May you give bread, beer, and joy in every season, in every hour, for all eternity." It's not flashy, but it's timeless. A promise etched in stone that even in the stillness of death, time continues not just through rituals and calendars, but through memory, name, and story. You look back toward the horizon. It's nearly dawn. A thin thread of blue glows behind the hills, and somewhere, far below the earth, Ra is reaching the 12th hour, the last gate, the last challenge. He's almost ready to rise. The first bird calls ripple through the palm trees like a soft percussion. A chill skims over your skin, not the cold of night, but the hush of just before dawn. When the world feels like it's holding its breath, you're no longer in the necropolis. At some point during the last hour, your steps carried you silently back toward the temple. The sandstone walls are a shade darker now, dampened by the night air. The great obelisks rise like frozen lightning bolts against a sky that's shifting blue, edged with copper, and you know what that means. It's the first hour of the new day. Time, once again, has reset, but not with fanfare, not with alarms or fireworks or any grand declaration, just with the simple return of light. You sit by the base of an obelisk, its shadow just beginning to emerge on the western flagstones. The tip catches the sun first, gleaming like the eye of Ra opening over the horizon. These obelisks weren't just monuments, they were sun needles, tipped in electrum or gold, designed to catch the first kiss of morning and remind everyone humble or royal that the divine had returned. And with that return, a question arises. How did the Egyptians use the new day to begin again? You walk toward the temple's eastern gate, passing sleepy-eyed priests arranging the morning offerings. They move slowly, reverently, as if still half dreaming. Incense curls up like breath. The air smells of frankincense and fresh lotus. The ritual of opening the mouth is about to begin, not for a statue this time, but for the day itself. You peek into the sanctuary where a priest intones the first hymn. He chants to the rising sun, not merely praising it, but awakening it, drawing it back into the world with sound. Quirky fact, every morning, temple staff reenacted parts of the solar rebirth myth. They'd literally sing Ra into the sky as if their voices helped push him from the underworld as final gate. And then just as the sun breaks fully over the horizon, something subtle happens. The great water clock in the courtyard is emptied and refilled. Yes. You return to that basin with the tiny hole at the bottom, and there's a new jar now and a new water. Because a new day doesn't just happen, it's measured into being. Historians still argue about how exactly these clocks were calibrated. Did priests track the water flow by eye, or did they use calibrated measuring sticks? Some even suggest that sound like a dripping rhythm helped them estimate the passing of each hour. But one thing is certain, the clock doesn't start itself. Someone has to reset it. You think back on that idea. How many of us today wake up to flashing phone screens, half dreaming of emails, eyes barely open? Here, they rise with purpose. To sing, to measure, to honor, to begin again, not just by waking up, but by acknowledging the ritual of return. You notice something charming now, an elderly man sketching the obelisk's shadow in the dust with a stick. He marks where it landed yesterday. Then today. The line is different. The solstice is coming. He murmurs to no one. You smile. That gentle blend of science, myth, and casual morning routine. It's so Egyptian. Time here isn't about rush. It's about awareness. It's a reminder that time is something you co-create. You rise and wander toward the temple's open plaza. The sun now floods the space, filling every corner with gold. The columns glow. The birds sing louder. Workers begin to stir on the road outside. The hour of labor approaches. But first, prayer, alignment, breath. You take one final look at the obelisk's growing shadow. It stretches toward the temple door like a sundial's arm rising from sleep. A new hour has begun. Not just another notch on a clock, but another chance to live in rhythm. And here, in this ancient morning, among gods and dust and sunlight, you feel it. Time, not as a master but as a companion.
All right, now we step outside entirely. No chambers. No hearths. No thick featherbeds or shared haylofts. Tonight, you're on the move. And with the stars as your ceiling and the dirt as your mattress, we enter the underappreciated world of Tudor sleep on the road. Because not everyone in the 16th century had the luxury of a bed or even a roof. People traveled, people wandered, and people got by. You might be a pilgrim, walking miles to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. You could be a merchant, carting sacks of wool between towns. A soldier, a messenger, or just someone looking for seasonal work. And when night fell, you didn't always make it to the nearest inn. So, what did you do? You slept where you could. If you were lucky or just well connected, you might beg a night in someone's barn. Barns were warmer than open fields, and often came with a bonus: animals. Sleeping beside cows or horses was messy and noisy, yes. But the body heat alone could keep you alive on a frosty night. Many farmers allowed travelers to bed down in outbuildings or lean-tos provided you didn't steal, break anything, or bring lice. If you were especially persuasive or pitiful looking, you might even get a bowl of porridge and a blanket. But don't count on it. Inns were the next option. But inns weren't always reliable, and they weren't exactly Hiltons of 1570s travelers. Account notes that one inn in Norfolk offered a straw pallet, a damp room, and 2 drunkards for company. Charming. Most inns had communal sleeping quarters, meaning you shared your room and sometimes your bed with strangers. Snoring strangers. Flatulent strangers. Strangers with suspicious coughs. There were no locks. No privacy. No do not disturb signs. Just bodies, blankets, and maybe a chamber pot in the corner. Sometimes you'd even find yourself with an unexpected bedfellow, the innkeeper's cousin, the cook's son, or a man who wandered in drunk and forgot which mattress was his. Still, an inn meant walls, which beat the alternative, sleeping outside. Tudor England had homelessness, a wordless, constant background to village life. Vagrants, beggars, displaced laborers, orphaned children. People without places. These people slept where they could, beneath hedgerows, in church porches, under bridges. Some even dug shallow nests into the earth, lining them with bracken or straw. One 1590s London pamphlet describes a man who spent winter nights beneath the south wall of St. Dunstan's, wrapped in a burlap sack, dreaming of bread. Those lucky enough to find an abandoned cart or a ruined building might make a kind of den, but they had to be ready to move. Night watchmen, concerned citizens, and irritable priests often chased them off before sunrise. And of course, the law didn't take kindly to masterless men. Under the Tudor Vagabonds Acts, being found on the road without gainful employment or a master to vouch for you could result in whipping, branding, or forced labor. Some wanderers carried forged badges or licenses, pretending to be pilgrims or couriers to avoid suspicion. Historians still argue how strictly these laws were enforced. Some towns were harsher than others. In rural areas, the rules blurred, especially during harvest seasons when laborers were needed. But the stigma remained. To sleep outside was to be outside of society. And yet, some travelers embraced it. There were Romani families known then, inaccurately, as Egyptians, who moved in caravans, sleeping beneath the stars by choice. Their tents and wagons formed little mobile villages. Local authorities often distrusted them, but they maintained their own traditions, including how, where, and when to sleep. Pilgrims, too, saw hardship as holy. Sleeping rough was a kind of devotion, proof of sacrifice. One woman journeying barefoot from York to Canterbury described sleeping in a field face to the moon, with the bones of my back upon the Lord's earth. Very poetic. Possibly uncomfortable. Then there were the minstrels, peddlers, and actors, those half-invited guests of Tudor society, tolerated when amusing, feared when idle. They wandered from town to town, putting on plays, singing songs, selling wares. Their sleep arrangements? Entirely improvised. One troupe reportedly slept in an abandoned pigsty near Oxford after a show, with one actor using his lute as a pillow and another attempting to use a pig as a foot warmer. The pig was not cooperative, and yet many travelers spoke of moments of peace, waking to birdsong, falling asleep beside a gently running stream, watching the stars blink through the trees. These weren't comforts exactly, but they were real. And in a life of movement, moments mattered. A merchant's diary from 1556 includes this entry. Camped near the old Roman road, slept with my back to an elm tree. Dreamt of my wife, then of horses with wings. Woke with frost in my beard. Beautiful. And a little cold. Even in cities, outdoor sleep was common. On hot summer nights, poor Londoners might sleep on the steps of churches or the docks near the Thames. It was noisy, risky, but better than roasting indoors, especially in cramped housing where windows barely opened and bodies steamed like dumplings. Some inns, recognizing this, began offering cheaper outdoor lodging, essentially a bench and a blanket under an awning. Not exactly restful, but better than nothing. Think of it as the Tudor version of the budget hostel. Historians still debate whether Tudor-era England had anything like a sleeping class, a stratum of people who lived permanently on the edge of rest. But the stories are there, those who wandered, dozed, curled up in doorways, or nodded off beside their carts, always one step away from being seen, or chased off, or simply forgotten, and yet they slept. Because sleep, even in hardship, even on the side of a muddy road, was still a necessity, still a mercy. A chance, however brief, to escape hunger, fear, and the long march of hours. Next, we'll explore the rituals that came at the very end of life, how death, too, was tied to sleep, and how the Tudors blurred the line between resting and departing forever. Now, let's descend the social ladder quietly, so we don't wake anyone, and find out how the people who made the beds, stoked the fires, and emptied the chamber pots managed to sleep at all. Because when it comes to Tudor slumber, servants drew the short straw. Literally, in some cases, since their beds were often little more than sacks of straw laid across the floor, or tucked into corners. In grand households, servants were everywhere: maids, valets, footboys, nursemaids, cooks, stable hands, laundresses, and each had their own rhythm of work. And almost none of that rhythm favored a good night's sleep. Let's say you're a scullery maid. Your day starts before dawn, well before the gentry even begin to stir. You've got to rekindle the kitchen fire, haul water, and scrub yesterday's greasy pots, then serve breakfast, then clean up, then lunch, then the laundry, then dinner, then more scrubbing. And by the time you're allowed to sleep, it's midnight. And where do you sleep? Not in a cozy private room. Not even in a shared bed with a few others, though that's common too. You might be curled up near the warm ashes of the kitchen hearth, or on a straw mat tucked between two barrels in the pantry. Some slept in alcoves built into the walls with a curtain for privacy if they were lucky. Others literally rolled out bedding each night and rolled it back up before anyone noticed in the morning. One 16th century household manual suggests that the junior maid shall keep to the corner by the back stair, with a wool rug if the weather be foul. Romantic, no? But these weren't complaints, they were expectations. Servants weren't supposed to rest comfortably. In fact, too much comfort might signal laziness or pride. If you were too well rested, someone else probably had to pick up your slack. Only exceptions were wet nurses and nursemaids, who were occasionally given softer bedding so they wouldn't roll over onto their young charges. But even then, they were expected to wake on demand several times a night for feedings, changings, and soothing aristocratic wails. Historians still debate whether domestic servants in large households regularly napped to make up for lost nighttime hours. Some evidence suggests they did, grabbing 10 or 20 minutes when they could, especially during lull periods. Others argue that breaks were rare, and most workers simply functioned on chronic exhaustion. The truth likely varied by household and by rank. Higher-ranking servants, like stewards or ladies' maids, had slightly better arrangements. They might have a cot in a side room, or even share a small chamber with a colleague. Their sleep still wasn't luxurious, but at least it came with a pillow. Lower-ranking workers, especially boys and scullions, got the absolute worst of it. Short hours, loud quarters, unpredictable interruptions. And interruptions were constant. If the Lord rose in the night needing hot wine, you were up. If a horse threw a shoe at midnight, you were sent. If the mistress of the house had a headache and wanted someone to hum to her, that was your lullaby duty. There are stories of servants falling asleep mid-task, heads drooping over wash basins or plates. Others were caught dozing on staircases or slumped near the stables. Punishments varied. Some were scolded, others dismissed. In rare cases, someone might be locked in the cold yard to freshen the wits. Yes, that means exactly what you think. But sleep wasn't just stolen, it was also shared. Servants slept in close quarters, and often shared bedding. 2 to a blanket, 3 on a mattress. A boy curled under a bench while his elders slept above. There's even mention of 4 grooms sharing a single bed, by rotation, 2 waking, 2 resting. And the gossip? Oh, it thrived in the servants' quarters. Lying together in the dark, whispering, laughing, complaining about the master's new boots or the cook's suspicious pies. Bedtime gossip was its own culture. It was where rumors began and secrets escaped. More than one noble scandal found its roots in something the stable boy overheard near midnight. And unlike their employers, servants rarely had privacy. No curtains, no doors, no locks. If you dreamed aloud, someone heard it. If you cried in the night, someone noticed. And if you snored too loudly, well, you were very unpopular. Interestingly, some records suggest that servants dreamed differently. Because of their physical exhaustion and constant interruption, they were more likely to report fragmented, vivid, and disjointed dreams. Dreams of fires, tasks undone, or being late for a chore that didn't even exist. Sound familiar? But despite the rough conditions, there was resilience. Some servants grew deeply fond of their sleeping spots. A pantry girl once described her tucked-away bedroll as a rabbit hole where no voice but my own may find me. Others decorated small spaces with scraps of embroidery, dried herbs, or religious tokens. Even when sleep was short, it could still feel sacred. There were small comforts too. A warm brick from the fire placed at the foot of the bed. A bit of lavender tucked into a pillow. Shared jokes before dozing off. These weren't luxuries, but they were enough. Historians still debate whether sleep deprivation shortened the lives of Tudor servants. Some argue it contributed to illness, injury, and early death. Others suggest that the human body adapted, or at least endured. What's certain is that servant sleep was a battleground, waged every night between exhaustion and obligation. Next, we'll step outside the domestic walls and see how travelers, pilgrims, and the homeless found rest on roadsides, in barns, and under skies that didn't always stay dry.
And now, the sun climbs higher. The temple is awake. The world hums with motion again. Priests chant. Scribes scratch away at ledgers. Women carry baskets of bread balanced on their heads like offerings to a hungry sky. But as the city begins its busy rhythm, you begin to retreat. Not physically, your feet still glide over the same sun-worn stones, but inward, drifting toward the soft borderlands of thought, where memory and dream begin to blur. This has been a long journey, a quiet one, a sleepy one. But before we drift off completely, there's one last place we need to visit. Not a temple or a clock or a burial chamber. This time, it's a garden. Tucked behind a priest's quarters is a walled garden. Modest in size but abundant in green. You step through the reed gate and are met with rows of figs, pomegranates, and date palms. A shallow channel snakes through it all, bringing water from the Nile in slow pulses. And there, near a low pool, a man sits sketching. Not a priest or a scribe this time, just a gardener. Older, calm, his hands are stained with earth. You sit beside him on a low bench. He doesn't look up from his work, but he speaks. It's time again. He says, the seeds will be ready soon. And somehow you know he doesn't mean just the literal seeds, because time in this garden feels like the distillation of everything you've seen. The daily shadow paths, the night sky clockwork, the slow rise and fall of the Nile, the echoing chants and rituals of eternity. But here time simply grows. No gnomons, no dials, no stars to track. Just the soft, slow unfolding of leaves. You look at the gardener's sketch. It's a drawing of a papyrus plant, one he's clearly copied dozens of times, each with tiny differences in shading and bloom, each one marked lightly, with a small hieroglyph beside it, the sign for Nea. Time that flows, quirky. Tidbit. Egyptians sometimes planted small papyrus thickets beside tombs, believing they connected the realm of the living to the afterlife, not through magic but through time that moves forward. And the man beside you, he adds another line to the papyrus stem and finally says, we always think time passes, but really, it just gathers. Historians still argue what the Egyptians truly believed about time, whether their clocks and calendars were practical or deeply spiritual, whether they invented timekeeping for the gods or because they understood they were gods only by time. But you know the truth. You've walked the hours, floated through rituals, counted shadows and stars. And now, at the end of it all, you don't need a water clock or a sundial. You don't need a myth. You just need this, a place where time feels like presence instead of pressure, where it holds you instead of chasing you, where it lets you rest. You close your eyes. The gardener hums a melody under his breath-hold, tuneless. Comforting. A breeze stirs the reeds, and above the garden walls the sun continues its climb. The new day is fully here. But for you, it's time to sleep. Asterisk, let yourself drift now. Don't open your eyes. There's no need to move. No need to remember where you are. The journey's done. You've walked beside temple columns and measured hours by shifting shadows. You've floated with Ra beneath the stars and returned with him in a golden haze of sunrise. And now, the only time that matters is this moment, this breath. Let it slow. Let your shoulders sink just a little deeper. The ancient Egyptians understood something we often forget. That time doesn't always have to tick. It can ripple. It can sway. It can hum quietly beneath your skin like the beat of a drum or the lap of water in a shallow basin. They gave us more than clocks and calendars. They gave us a way to listen. So, as your thoughts begin to fade, imagine that soft garden again. Picture the way the reeds shift in the wind, the way the sun glints off a smooth obelisk, the way starlight once whispered the passing of hours across a quiet sky. You are safe here, unrushed, unbothered, timeless. There's nothing more to measure, nothing more to count, only the warmth of the sun behind your eyelids, and the hush of a world that knows how to pause. Let go of the day. Let go of thought. Time can keep turning without you for a while. Sleep now. Sweet dreams.